A new podcast featuring an AI recreation of the late Sir Michael Parkinson's voice will see Parky back doing what he did best, interviewing star names.
The podcast is going to be called Virtually Parkinson, and it's been created using thousands of his old interviews. We'll even be able to interact with live guests in the studio. And it's been done with the backing of his family, and we can talk to his son Mike in a moment, alongside one of the creators, Ben Field. First of all, though, Virtual Parky has sent us a message. Let's have a listen.
Good morning, Britain. Charlotte and Ed. It's a pleasure to be here. This is Michael Parkinson, or at least a digital version of me. I believe my son Mike and my co-producer Benjamin are with you to tell you about my new unscripted podcast. So, Charlotte and Ed, please get some details out of them, because to be honest with you, I haven't got a clue how any of it works. Anyway, good to speak to you this morning. See you again in the first episode, which I'm sure will be a delight.
That kind of makes me feel a bit sad, though,
I'm not quite sure how to feel about it. It's quite unusual. It will certainly be controversial.
Well, we'll speak to your son, because Mike Parkinson joins us now alongside Ben Field from Deep Fusion Films. Good morning to both of you. I mean, I think hearing that, I find that kind of sense of, oh, you know, that's his voice. But for you as his son, how does it feel when you're hearing his voice used in this way?
I think that what people have to understand is that as I had a company with my father for over 15 years. I produced him and collaborated with him. So I had a very sort of almost a kind of split relationship with him. So when he put on his suit and tie and walked down his stairs, that was Michael Parkinson, which is that voice is what I hear now. When he was at home and walked down his stairs in his dressing gown, that was my father. It's a very separate thing. So really what this came from was an extension of the work I've done with my dad, which essentially is looking after the archive, giving it more life after he's gone, and also just paying tribute to his legacy.
And, of course, that's a commercial proposition. Is that something that your dad was happy with, the idea that he would continue to commercially work as it is?
Well, obviously, because, I mean, why would he not? I mean, he spent most of his time with me looking at the archive, using the archive in various different ways. He would do live shows with me. We'd write books based on the archive. We'd do documentaries based on the archive. He was fascinated by the art of interviewing. He basically used to have a conversation with me saying, I wish there was the technology which could bring back people I never got a chance to interview. He would love to have brought back Frank Sinatra, people like Donald Bradman, all the great Hollywood starlets. And it came from that kind of strange conversation we had half jokingly. And I thought, well, actually, there might be something within that to not just extend the life, not just necessarily be commercial, but also to try and find a different audience, to try and find a new audience for someone who was a unique talent, an outlier talent of his generation. And it's worth to keep remembering that.
And the beneficiaries of the estate of Elvis or Frank Sinatra, you know, their songs continue to generate revenue and new fans after they passed, and the same with your dad.
Because if you look at the archive of my father, the 20th century, the people he interviewed in the 20th century was an extraordinary collection of people. And if you actually encourage another generation by actually employing new technology to introduce them to another generation, then actually they can go through that and realise that this is a unbelievable collection of archive that can kind of is timeless and is worth preserving and keep revisiting.
I mean, obviously, you'd had that conversation with your dad, but it does sort of open a whole can of worms, doesn't it, about how this technology could be used. And, you know, you could get this AI version to say things that your dad would never have said, couldn't you, in theory? Or people could use it for a loved one that's gone without their consent.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's the reason why I've gone and worked with Ben and Jamie at Deep Fusion, because there is absolutely no way that I would be involved in anything that would impugn the reputation of my father. No. We 100% would, and I, as the sort of person who has worked with Ben, would draw a line very, very firmly in the sand as to what my father will say, who my father will interview, and what he will be associated with. And I have to say, I'm not going to talk for Ben, but I think Ben's very strong in that way as well, aren't you, Ben?
Yeah, because, Ben, you know, there is that fear, I suppose, that people will think how this technology could then be used.
Yeah, and I think that fear is probably a really good word to use, because, you know, let's look at the positioning of where this is. This is a podcast. It's not, you know, we're not looking at doing something online, or, you know, in that sort of social media space, if you like, you know, in the way that people upload stuff, you know, onto the internet all the time. We are a production company. We live within professional boundaries, and we have to behave responsibly. And a lot of the work that I do outside of, you know, production is to sort of scope the policy about how AI can be used ethically within TV and film, and that is, you know, that is why Mike got in touch with us, because that's a lot of the work that we do, is making sure that AI is used responsibly.
Just explain to us, because I think that the phrase AI, you know, loads of our viewers will hear AI said a lot, and none of us are quite sure what it means. What does it mean to say AI is generating this? What do you actually do? What is the process which takes all of that past stuff, all those old Michael Parkinson interviews, and turns it into something which is living here today? How does it work?
It's, I mean, AI really is, you know, machine learning. So what AI is particularly good at is drawing from different data points, if you like, and coming up with new material from those data points, you know, whether it's learning something, machine learning. So what we've done is we've fed in, you know, as you say, 1,000 hours of Sir Michael Parkinson interviews, and that AI is then using that information to build new material. So it's taking those data points of you know, how did he talk, and it imbues his personality and his warmth. We're not passing it off as Michael Parkinson. I mean, absolutely not. But we're positioning the podcast so that this is a new way of exploring.
So it's not using snippets of things he said. It's sort of teaching.
No, it's absolutely all the content is new. It's unscripted and it's completely made up. And I think that's really important. Is that one of the things this podcast does, and it's the reason why you know, we got into this in the first place, is actually the podcast is not about Michael Parkinson per se. It's actually about an exploration of the relationship between AI and humans. What does it mean when we are engaged with an AI? Are there new relationships? You know, so you and I here are having a conversation, and I'm reading your micro-expressions, so I know that you want to interrupt me right now.
I do.
So, absolutely. But what's great is the fact that I'm reading that. It's not going to happen, apparently, but, but you and I'm reading that expression.
Yeah.
AI, Michael Parkinson, will not be able to... No, it won't be able to do that, because it's not watching you. It's only listening to the words you're saying.
Why can't it watch me?
Well, I mean, it could. I could build it.
Can't it learn from interaction?
Absolutely. I could build it in such a way that it would have a camera element and it would learn those.
See, that is what I wanted to ask, because it's exactly what you just said. The description you gave earlier about your dad, you know, there was the professional Michael Parkinson, but there was the guy who walked down the stairs in the dressing gown. There was no reason why this technology, you know, this may be not what you're going to do, but the technology could create your dad, the private person, for me. I could, you know, my loved one could stay with me. It can actually learn to read my expressions. I could have a conversation for years after the passing of my husband or wife.
Have you had an interaction with this voice as your dad? Have you had a conversation?
No, because he's not my dad. The thing about it is, he's not my dad. I mean, I'm not bringing my father back. It's not some kind of like Hamlet's ghost moment. I mean, it literally is a fascinating...
But lots of people would take comfort from that, though. I mean, it may be an amazing thing to be able to continue to live with your former husband or wife in some sense into the future.
I understand that. I just want to make the point that with all technology, the question always is that just because you can, should you? Well, and what I have to say is that we have to ask...
It sounds like a cool thing to do. It sounds like a good thing to do. If I'm lonely,
I agree. And my point is that the
conversation...
No, and I totally understand what you're saying. We are, as far as I can see, taking the baby steps.
Right.
We are showing what I think is the possibility, because when it comes down to it, whatever you read, whatever you see, within the next decade or so, the interaction between human and AI will occur. And we have to somehow become comfortable with that and explore and maybe understand the possibilities within that relationship. But actually, when it comes down to it, what I really want to try and say is that it potentially is an incredibly entertaining and exciting way to remember the talent that my father had for interviewing. And that, in many ways, that's what people should take away from this.
Of course.
And also the opportunity to, again, revisit some of his wonderful art.
Absolutely. I just saw you know, but if you could have the option to have a conversation with your private father, do you think you'd choose to do it?
It's a very interesting conversation, and it's an interesting thought about it. When you lose someone, inevitably everybody does things like they will keep voicemails. They will often say, as the grieving process continues, I can't remember what they sound like. if you had the possibility to interact with something or someone's area, I think it could cause, I think it would be a personal thing. From my point of view, because I worked so closely with my father, because my father's on television every time I turn it on, it's different because he's always there. And also I spend my entire working life essentially surrounded by his archives, surrounded by his professional legacy, so it's a different issue. It's a harder question for me to ask. It'd be an interesting question to ask to someone who doesn't have someone who's in the public eye.
But funnily enough, that did actually come to me last night, was that actually we had a number of inbound requests to my email address last night asking just for that.
For people wanting to use it,
can I get this software somewhere that we've built? Can I get that so that I can have conversations with my own? Because I've got this, you know, I've kept the voicemails.
My mum's had dementia for 20 years. I would love to have a conversation with my mum before she had the dementia.
Also, there's something,
I can't do that anymore. But
there's also something fascinating. Something that's actually very fascinating I found out yesterday about the AI, which is interesting as why, in many ways, my father is a wonderful subject for it, is that it's a great listener. It listens acutely. It doesn't have any of the filters that we're listening. I mean, you've probably got 14 things in your mind at the moment, so you're filtering through what you're listening. This AI doesn't.
They're telling us to move on because we're out of time and we're ignoring them because we're so interested by what you're saying. That's what's happening.
Because it listens, and that is a different relationship.
Well, you can have. It is absolutely fascinating. Thank you both for coming in. I think we should leave the last
completely
word,
mind-opening,
didn't
actually,
we?
isn't it? It's amazing. It makes you think in a different way.
Should we hear from
should.
virtual Parky? Let's just hear a clip.
It's a pleasure to be here. This is Michael Parkinson, or at least a digital version of me.
And there we go, ending that. And we can hear the first episode of that podcast in December, so we will look forward to hearing more details. Thanks both very much for coming in.
But you've got to tell us, who's the first interview going to be with?
We can't tell you that.
It's...
And we're
wait, no time.
Fine.
In your ear, remember?
Could have been the AI version. We might have been able to trick you into telling us, mightn't we? Thank you.
Thank you so much.